Last night's Late Show turned explosive when Jennifer Lawrence confronted Stephen Colbert over his relentless questioning about her personal life, leading to the most shocking celebrity walkout in talk show history. The studio lights dimmed as the familiar Late Show theme echoed through the Ed Sullivan Theater, but nobody could have predicted the chaos that would unfold. Stephen Colbert, wearing his signature smirk, adjusted his tie as he prepared to welcome his guest. The audience buzzed with anticipation, unaware they were about to witness television history in the making. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incredibly talented Jennifer Lawrence, Colbert announced with theatrical enthusiasm. The Oscar-winning actress emerged from backstage, her smile bright, but something seemed different tonight. She waved to the cheering crowd, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set just a fraction tighter than usual. As Lawrence settled into the guest chair, Colbert launched into his opening banter with his typical sharp wit. "Jennifer, wonderful to have you back. You look fantastic, though I have to say, you seem a little more guarded than usual. Everything okay at home?" The question landed with an uncomfortable thud, and Lawrence's smile faltered for just a moment. "I'm doing great, Stephen. Thanks for having me," she replied, her voice steady but measured. The audience laughed at what they assumed was playful teasing, but keen observers could sense an undercurrent of something more serious brewing. Colbert pressed forward, seemingly oblivious to the warning signs. "Now I know our viewers are dying to know about your recent relationship developments. There have been some interesting headlines lately." He leaned forward conspiratorially, his eyes gleaming with the promise of juicy gossip. Lawrence's posture stiffened noticeably. "Stephen, I thought we were here to talk about my new film. That's what your producers told my team." Her voice carried a slight edge that made several crew members exchange worried glances. "Oh, we'll get to the movie, of course." Colbert waved, dismissively. "But come on, Jennifer. Our audience loves getting the real scoop. They want to know about Jennifer Lawrence, the person, not just the actress. So tell us, how are you handling all the scrutiny about your personal choices lately?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Lawrence's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since sitting down, she looked directly at Colbert, with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. "What exactly are you referring to, Stephen?" Colbert, sensing he had struck something, doubled down with the persistence of a shark smelling blood. "Well, there's been quite a bit of discussion online about your lifestyle choices. Some people are saying you've become quite the party girl. Others are questioning your judgment in general. I mean, we've all seen the photos from that charity gala last month." The studio fell eerily quiet. Even the usually responsive audience seemed to sense that something had shifted. Lawrence's knuckles were white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. "Those photos were taken completely out of context, and you know it. I was supporting a cause I believe in, and the media twisted everything. But Jennifer," Colbert continued with mock concern, "surely you understand that when you're in the public eye, everything is fair game? I mean, you can't expect to have it both ways, reaping the benefits of fame while demanding complete privacy." Lawrence stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the studio floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. "That's enough, Stephen. I came here in good faith to promote my work, not to be ambushed with tabloid gossip and personal attacks disguised as interview questions." Colbert, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, but unable to back down in front of his live audience, attempted to lighten the mood with humor. "Oh, come on, Jennifer, don't be so sensitive. This is just how the game is played. Sit back down, let's have some fun with this." The word sensitive seemed to flip a switch in Lawrence. Her eyes flashed with a fury that had been building throughout the interview. "Sensitive? Sensitive?" Her voice rose, carrying clearly through the theater's sound system. "You ambush me with personal questions, attack my character based on manipulated photographs, and then have the audacity to call me sensitive when I object?" The audience sat in shocked silence, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate bit or genuine conflict. Colbert's smile faltered as he realized this was no longer entertainment. This was a real confrontation spiraling beyond his control. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Camera operators continued filming, uncertain whether they should cut away, while the show's producers frantically gestured from the wings. Lawrence stood towering over Colbert, her chest rising and falling with barely contained rage. The late-night host, for perhaps the first time in his career, appeared genuinely rattled. "Jennifer, please, let's just—" Colbert began, his voice losing its trademark confidence. "No, Stephen, you don't get to control this conversation anymore," Lawrence interrupted, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "You think you can hide behind your desk and your jokes while you tear people apart? You think this is journalism?" Colbert attempted to regain his composure, straightening in his chair and forcing his media-trained smile back into place. "Look, I'm just doing my job here. My audience expects—" "Your audience expects entertainment, not character assassination." Lawrence's voice echoed off the studio walls. "There's a difference between being provocative and being predatory, Stephen. What you just did crossed every line of professional decency." The host's face flushed red, his carefully constructed persona cracking under the pressure. "I think that's a bit of an overreaction, don't you? We're just having a conversation here." Conversation?" Lawrence let out a bitter laugh that sent chills through the stunned audience. "You call ambushing someone with personal attacks and tabloid gossip a conversation? You didn't ask me a single question about my craft, my upcoming projects, or anything remotely professional. Instead, you chose to attack my personal life based on manipulated media coverage." Colbert's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his mask slipped completely. "Listen, Jennifer, if you can't handle the heat of being a public figure, maybe you should have thought about that before taking those 7-figure paychecks. Fame comes with a price." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Even the most loyal Colbert fans in the audience seemed to recoil at the harshness of his statement. Lawrence's face went white, then red, as the full impact of his words hit her. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you suggest that my success somehow entitles you or anyone else to treat me like garbage? I've worked my entire life to get where I am, and I didn't sign away my basic human dignity when I accepted my first role." The studio fell so quiet that the hum of the overhead lights became audible. Colbert, perhaps sensing he had gone too far, attempted damage control. "Now, Jennifer, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Lawrence cut him off, her voice now steady and cold. "You meant every word. This is who you really are when the cameras are rolling and you think you have power over someone. You're a bully hiding behind comedy." Colbert's face darkened, and his true nature began to emerge. "Oh, spare me the victim act, Jennifer. You Hollywood types are all the same. You want all the perks of fame, but none of the accountability. You think you can waltz in here and dictate how this interview goes? I think I can expect basic human respect," Lawrence shot back. "Something you clearly don't understand. You've spent this entire interview trying to humiliate me for your audience's entertainment, and when I stand up for myself, you call it an act?" The confrontation had reached a fever pitch. Audience members were now visibly uncomfortable, some whispering to each other, others reaching for their phones to record what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. The show's staff remained frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the drama play out. Colbert leaned back in his chair, his expression turning mocking. "You know what, Jennifer? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have asked you about your craft," he said, making air quotes with obvious sarcasm. "Tell me, what's it like being overpaid to pretend to be other people while the rest of us live in the real world?" The insult landed like a physical blow. Lawrence's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, hurt, then blazing fury. The audience collectively gasped, finally understanding that this wasn't scripted entertainment, but a genuine hostile encounter unfolding before their eyes. Overpaid to pretend? Lawrence's voice was dangerously quiet now, the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. Stephen, you sit behind that desk every night making jokes about people you've never met, criticizing decisions you've never had to make, and passing judgment on lives you could never understand. And you want to talk to me about living in the real world? Colbert's smugness wavered for a moment, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. At least I deal with facts, Jennifer. I report on reality. You live in fantasy land where everyone tells you how wonderful you are. Facts? Lawrence stepped closer to his desk, her hands planted firmly on its surface as she leaned toward him. Your facts tonight consisted of twisted tabloid stories and completely fabricated narratives about my personal life. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's gossip masquerading as news. The studio had become a pressure cooker. Crew members stood frozen at their posts, unsure whether to continue filming or cut to commercial. The show's director frantically signaled from the control booth, but nobody seemed willing to interrupt what was becoming the most explosive late-night television moment in decades. Colbert's face flushed deeper red as he realized he was losing control of the situation. You think you can just walk in here and lecture me about journalism? I've been doing this for 20 years, and in 20 years, you've apparently learned nothing about basic human decency. Lawrence's voice cracked, with emotion. Do you have any idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every mistake magnified, your every relationship dissected for public consumption? Do you know what it's like to have people like you profit off your pain? The raw vulnerability in her voice seemed to catch even Colbert off guard. For a moment, his expression softened, but then his pride reasserted itself. That's the price of fame, Jennifer. Nobody forced you to become an actress. Nobody forced you to become a heartless bully either, but here we are, Lawrence shot back, her voice regaining its strength. You could have chosen to use your platform to lift people up, to have meaningful conversations, to actually contribute something positive to the world. Instead, you chose to be another vulture feeding off other people's struggles. The audience was now openly murmuring, with some people actually standing up as if preparing to leave. The tension had become so uncomfortable that even being a spectator felt wrong. Colbert glanced nervously at his audience, perhaps finally realizing how badly this was playing. I think you're being a little dramatic here, Jennifer, he said, attempting to regain his composure. This is just how these interviews work. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows? Lawrence's laugh was sharp and bitter. Everyone knows that. It's acceptable to ambush guests with personal attacks. Everyone knows that basic respect goes out the window the moment someone sits in that chair. Is that really the legacy you want to leave? Colbert's mask was now completely gone, replaced by something uglier and more desperate. My legacy? I've entertained millions of people. I've held politicians accountable. I've made people laugh during the darkest times in recent history. What have you done besides make blockbuster movies and complain about the consequences? I've tried to be a decent human being, Lawrence replied quietly, but her words carried more weight than any shout. I've used my platform to advocate for causes I believe in. I've treated people with respect regardless of their status. I've tried to remember that fame doesn't make me better than anyone else. It just makes me more visible. The confrontation had reached a crossroads. Colbert seemed to realize that he had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, but his pride wouldn't allow him to apologize or retreat. Instead, he doubled down with the desperation of someone who knew they were drowning. You want to talk about respect, Jennifer. Respect is earned. And walking into someone else's show and trying to dictate the terms isn't respectful. It's entitled. Those words were the final straw. Lawrence straightened to her full height, her eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to electrify the entire studio. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet and the distant hum of cameras still rolling. Entitled? Lawrence's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of thunder. You think standing up for basic human dignity makes me entitled? You think refusing to be your verbal punching bag for entertainment makes me demanding? She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then I guess I'm the most entitled person in this room, Stephen, because I will never apologize for demanding to be treated like a human being. Colbert's face twisted with a mixture of anger and desperation. He could feel the situation slipping, completely beyond his control, and his response revealed the petty vindictiveness that had been lurking beneath his polished exterior all along. Fine, Jennifer. If you can't handle a simple interview, maybe you should stick to movies where someone else writes your lines for you. The cruelty of the comment sent a visible shockwave through the studio. Even the most jaded crew members looked appalled. Lawrence stood perfectly still for a moment, absorbing the full impact of his words. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a quiet authority that commanded absolute attention. You know what, Stephen? You're absolutely right about one thing. I do have lines written for me in movies. But those lines are crafted by talented writers who understand storytelling, character development, and human emotion. Your lines tonight? They were written by someone with no understanding of any of those things, someone who mistakes cruelty for cleverness and bullying for bravery. She turned to address the stunned audience directly, her voice clear and strong. I want everyone here to understand something. What you witnessed tonight isn't entertainment. It's not even journalism. It's a powerful person using their platform to tear down someone else for sport. And if we normalize this behavior, if we accept that this is just how things work, then we're all complicit in creating a world where basic decency becomes optional. The audience sat in stunned silence, many nodding in agreement. Some were openly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. The spell of celebrity worship had been broken, replaced by the harsh reality of what they had just seen. Colbert made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Jennifer, I think you're overreacting to what was clearly just, don't. Lawrence's single word cut through his excuse like a knife. Don't you dare try to minimize what just happened here. Don't try to gaslight me or this audience into believing that what we all experienced wasn't real. You showed everyone exactly who you are tonight, Stephen. Own it. She began gathering her belongings, her movements deliberate and dignified despite the chaos of the moment. The studio remained eerily quiet, with only the sound of her heels clicking against the floor as she prepared to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, Lawrence addressed the audience one final time. I came here tonight to talk about a project I'm passionate about, to share something meaningful with people who might be interested. Instead, I was subjected to a calculated attack on my character and personal life. I hope you'll remember this moment not for the spectacle, but for what it represents about how we choose to treat each other. Colbert sat frozen behind his desk, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. The weight of what had transpired was finally hitting him, but his pride prevented him from offering the apology that might have salvaged some dignity from the wreckage. Lawrence walked toward the exit with her head held high, pausing only once, to deliver her final words. Stephen, I genuinely hope that someday you'll understand the difference between holding people accountable and tearing them down. Until then, I pity anyone who has to sit in that chair across from you. With that, she disappeared through the backstage entrance, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces and uncomfortable silence. Colbert sat alone at his desk, the full weight of his actions finally becoming clear as he looked out at an audience that was no longer laughing with him, but staring at him with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. The show limped to its conclusion without any attempt to address what had happened. No apologies were offered, no explanations given. Within hours, footage of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms, sparking fierce debates about accountability, respect, and the responsibilities that come with power in the Entertainment industry. The incident would mark a turning point, not just for those involved, but for how audiences viewed the relationship between hosts and guests, power and vulnerability, entertainment, and basic human decency.